Are Bleach's final villains too strong? This was one of the common complaints when the manga originally ended, and it's still something a lot of Bleach fans believe. And with broken reversals, ridiculous power that easily kills Squad Zero, and Yu Hawk's busted ability, it's easy to see why. But considering fights in Bleach have always ended as fast as they've started, and the fact that the Soul Reapers have some pretty busted abilities themselves, I think the fact that the Sternritter are so strong is not only perfectly fair, but it's a big reason the ending is as good as it is. To explain what I mean, let's start by addressing the overall complaint, namely that the Sternritter are too strong, or rather that they seem to be unfairly strong in a way that feels unearned. They show up to the Soul Society and make just about everyone look like poopy babies. Kira gets destroyed, Toshiro gets destroyed, Soifone, Komamura, Byakuya of all people. So then Squad Zero shows up and they're all like, oh, you guys are a bunch of poopy babies, you better get strong like us. And right after they say that, they all get wrecked. The squad that pops up is hyped up to be on a completely different level than the other captains, gets wiped out in like 10 chapters. So the idea that these Sternritter are way too strong to the point that they kinda hurt the story isn't that unreasonable. That being said, there's a few reasons why that isn't really the case. First of all, I will admit that Squad Zero wasn't really handled all that well. They're great characters, but the way they were beaten definitely could have been done better. That being said, I think what happened to them was generally going to happen one way or another. I mean, think about it. First, the captains get their asses beat. Then Squad Zero gets hyped up as if they're so much stronger. I mean, they literally go out of their way to be like, oh bro, if we used our Bankais, it would, I don't know, probably destroy the world or something. That's a pretty big flex. And even after that, they still lose to the Sternritter. If anything, this elevates them as villains, because if Squad Zero couldn't even beat them, then they clearly must be the strongest villains we've seen so far. And when the captains eventually beat them, it gets us to believe that now the captains are on the same level as Squad Zero, if not stronger. So instead of hurting the story, them getting beat so easily makes it that much more exciting. Again, it definitely should have been executed better, but it still creates this opportunity for the characters to be elevated. And something else I'd like to point out about Squad Zero is that they were about to beat the Sternritter before Yu Hawk used his ability to absorb all the Quincy's power and give it to the Schutzstaffel. So like, yeah, they're strong, but there is a legitimate question of whether that fight would have gone differently if Yu Hawk hadn't done that. But even then, that kinda just proves how busted the Sternritter really are. Because even when they might not be that much stronger, they have all these busted abilities that give them crazy advantages. There's the Bankai stealing thing, Ugrum's busted ability, Uryu's ability. So you could argue that even if the Sternritter might not literally be too strong, their crazy abilities make them overpowered. Now again, it's pretty easy to debunk this claim as well. But before I say more on that, make sure to like the video if you're enjoying it so far. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it helps spread the video to other viewers like you. So first, let's talk about the Bankai thing. It does seem pretty ridiculous at first, but the reality is that it's pretty easy to deal with once you know the trick. In this case, they did it by holoifying their Bankai. Plus, even when the Sternritter do steal abilities, they can't even use them that well. As Urahara points out, the Quincy's are weak to holos, so if it's a holo ability, it messes them up. And when they steal Bankai, they still don't know how to use those Bankai as well as the owners. So the whole Bankai stealing thing really isn't that broken. But then you still have the actual abilities the Sternritter can use. For example, Ugrum's Shrift, the Balance, allows him to absorb all misfortune that would affect him and turn it against his enemy. Alternatively, he can take an enemy's good fortune and redirect it as misfortune against them. That right there is pretty busted because it's like the most absurd version of a reversal you could have. Like, even if you don't attack and just defend yourself, just doing that can end up killing you because of Ugrum's ability. You also have Uryu's ability Antithesis, which is kinda the same except he reverses the actions between two targets. so he can swap injuries, locations, basically whatever, making it a more abstract and arguably more powerful ability than Yugram's. And then of course you have the other Schutzstaffel, whose abilities I won't get too deep into to avoid spoiling any anime-only fans. And at this point, I'd just like to say, yeah, the Schutzstaffel's abilities are pretty busted. The only one who really isn't all that strong is Pernita, because all he does is copy people. Lily's is really strong, but it's not as impossible to fight against as the other ones. But these abilities only seem broken if you view them in isolation. The reality is that the Soul Reaper's abilities are just as broken. Now for this part I do kinda need to talk about some of these Bankai, so you might want to come back to this part if you're not caught up. So first you have Mayuri, who can make a Bankai specifically designed to stop his opponent. You have Shunsui, who can also redirect damage and then force you to destroy yourself. Kenpachi is Kenpachi, and Urahara basically has the Kubo version of Law's Devil Fruit abilities. So sure, the Sternritter might have some crazy abilities, but in reality, it's only the Schutzstaffel, and even then, while they might be broken, the captain's abilities are just as broken. So yes, they are crazy, but in context, it's not really accurate to call them busted or broken. The only one whose ability is really broken is Yu Hawak. But he's the final villain, so, you know, why wouldn't it be? It's the same reason Aizen is so strong. If he wasn't as strong as he was, then it would have seriously undermined the quality of the fights. And the same is true for the Sternritter fights as well. It's only because the captains got their asses beat that we got to see all of the crazy new power-ups like Kenpachi's Shikai or Komamura's human form. And especially with the Schutzstaffel, we got to see the jumpings. Which, post-Jujutsu Kaisen, I think we can all agree that jumpings are very much a good thing. Plus, these 2-on-1 fights lead to some of the best team-ups and character growth in the entire story. And that's only because these characters all had to face such an overwhelming challenge. If it weren't for their busted abilities, we probably wouldn't have seen these team-ups, meaning we wouldn't have seen all of the other great stuff as well. Now, one last thing I'd like to bring up is the nature of Bleach fights overall. Whereas someone like Oda likes to write very drawn-out fights, Kubo likes to make them short and to the point. All of the fights in Soul Society are pretty short. Ikaku's fight where he uses his Bankai is short. Hell, all of Ichigo's fights are short. His rivalry against Grimmjow was hyped up for something like 30 chapters, maybe even longer. The actual fight is only about 5 chapters, which is true for a lot of the final fights as well. So I think part of the problem with the Quincy's is that this arc is especially long, but the fights are just as short as they've always been. So when you have these characters, Quincy's and Squad Zero, that get all kinds of crazy hype, more so than we're used to, and then they die just as quickly as we've seen before, I think that contrast is what aggravates this feeling that the end bosses are overpowered. What I'm saying is that when you read this arc for the first time, things might feel faster than they really are. But once you're like my guy Pokesol and you read it, I don't know, a couple of 100 times, it's not nearly as bad. Having read this arc a bunch of times myself, I'm at a point where I feel like most of these characters are perfectly balanced. That being said, there are a couple of issues you can't overlook. If it weren't for the busted abilities of characters like Shunsui, the Sternritter would feel pretty broken. And the biggest issue that no amount of copium can fix is the fact that Squad Zero was just not handled well at all. They get way overhyped considering that they lose just as fast as a lot of the other characters. But in spite of that, the Sternritter are far from overpowered. They may have busted abilities, but those abilities pushed the characters in a way that led to Bleach's best fights and some of its all-time best character moments. But now I'd like to hear what you think. Are the Sternritter really overpowered? How would you change some of these characters? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And if you'd like to join me for another discussion like this one, then make sure to check out my live streams every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday. In those streams, I react to new chapters as well as discuss other anime and manga topics. Also, make sure to look for more Bleach videos in the Bleach playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.